While they're a beleaguered minority in Massachusetts, Bay State Republicans tend to find a warmer welcome on local talk radio stations like WRKO and WEEI. Still, something about John Dennis's recent conversation with senatorial hopeful Geoff Diehl felt off. Adam Riley has more.
Last week on WEEI, John Dennis wrapped up a stint guest hosting by introducing his sidekicks, Trenny Kuznirik and Alex Reamer, to a special guest of his own.
There's somebody that you need to hear, not just you two, but everybody, and be exposed to and listen to the logical, commonsensical ideas and commitment and passion that State Representative Geoff Diehl has for his constituents. And he is the guy, in case you don't know, who is already running hard to try to win the U.S. Senate seat away from Liz Warren.
As are two other Republicans, Beth Lindstrom and John Kingston, but they went unmentioned. Anyway, Dennis said his goal was to have Diehl and Warren in the studio together, but
unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, only one showed up, and that would be Geoff.
Maybe she would have come on if she would have known it was a safe environment with the two of us.
Perhaps.
For that to have happened, though, Warren would have needed an invite, and her campaign says, as far as they can tell, she never got one. When Diehl took to the mic, Dennis took it easy.
Geoff, you, correct me if I'm wrong, have already been out on the campaign trail, right? Pressing the flesh and around the state?
About 7 or 8 months or so.
About 7 or 8 months.
Ask my wife.
All right.
That exchange was strange because Dennis actually emceed Diehl's campaign kickoff back in August.
Elizabeth Warren, and I think it's so appropriate that her initials are EWU.
All of which makes for an interview with asterisks. We asked Dennis to explain his M.O. So far, we haven't heard back.
So here's the thing about this. I mean, WEEI does a lot of news talk in the morning. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But if they're going to do that, and this is, I realize this is a substitute host, you just put it in context. If he had said who he is, if he had said, I'm a supporter of Geoff Diehl, I was at the MC of his cookout, people would have taken it for what it is. But it goes to his credibility, especially when he intimated, without coming out and saying, that he invited Elizabeth Warren. First of all, why would she go? Geoff Diehl is not the Republican nominee yet. He does have two other contenders. So why would she make that appearance? And this sort of harkens back to what they did when Martha Coakley was running against Scott Brown and giving him, free platform every day and making fun of her, Looney Tunes and Looney Left and all that.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, we've seen this kind of thing before with, Howie Carr has been featured at a number of Republican events and then goes on the radio and writes his Herald column as if he were an independent pontificator in some way. It's just too bad. And I listened to this whole thing, and what's too bad about it is that Geoff Diehl, who I know very little about, seems like a pretty good guy. And for him to be dragged into John Dennis's failure to disclose his own interest in this is unfortunate, because Diehl's trying to get his message out, and it's turned out he doesn't care, except that now we're criticizing it, and it's really not fair to him.
It's similar in a lot of ways to the ways that certain Fox News hosts have had very, in some cases, very strong connected relationships with the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, when that was active. You had Sean Hannity appearing at campaign events while he was also hosting a show. The argument is that people know the distinction between opinion journalism and journalism. Some people do, some people don't. I suggest they look up whatever the form is to report an in-kind contribution to a campaign.
I didn't have a problem with it because I don't consider that to be a news show. It's a sports program. Yes, they are covering more news and events and those kinds of things, but they're not journalists. They do a morning show and they talk about all kinds of crazy things on that show. And frankly, if you're going to point the finger at this, there are all sorts of examples of these sports shows where someone is reporting on a team, but they're employed by the team. They're doing play-by-play for the team. So I don't, if this were a local news show on one of the TV networks or even on one of the radio stations from the news department, and they did something like this, then I think I'd be all over them. But in this case, I think you always want to open the window, have full disclosure about your participation with a political candidate. But in this case, he's not a news figure. I think he can do what he wants to do on that show. It's entertainment.
Maybe I would go along with that if he hadn't brought in the kind of phony invitation to Elizabeth Warren. Now you're traversing in another territory. If you want to come on and say, Geoff Diehl is my guy, and I'm so glad to have him on today, and by the way, I'm on the campaign trail, you're going to hear a lot about him from me because he's my guy. You know, that's your deal. Okay. But don't make it seem as though I invited, Elizabeth Warren, but she didn't want to come because, of course, she's not my guy. That's not fair.
Well, it was all part of his
by the way,
act,
I've moderated a conversation with Geoff Diehl. He's big and grown. He can take care of himself. You don't need to put him in this position, as Dan has said. That's ridiculous.
Also, I'm going to push back a little bit because WEEI really doesn't do as much sports talk as a lot of the other sports programs. Right. And they wade into the news territory a lot. And they have broken news, as we know with the Globe story a few weeks ago. They reported, the name of the person who had been accused of sexual harassment inside. So they do care.
Oh, I didn't say they didn't care. But they're an entertainment. They're there to entertain, not to inform. I don't see that as a news information show. Do they cover news and do they sometimes break news? Yes, but that's not their mission,
but if
you will.
I've got to push political candidates.
Yes, I've got to push back, Dan. I mean, they're doing journalism of a sort. John Dennis may no longer be working as a journalist, but he was doing journalism in that instance, and it was an undisclosed conflict.
And he certainly did it when he was at Channel 7. Anyway.